So, Nikhaili, before we went on break, we're discussing options that Kenya has now, considering the developments yesterday within the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. But Kenya regionally has been seen not just as an economic powerhouse, but one of the most politically stable countries within the region. What importance would it be to you as a UK commissioner that Kenya pulls out of this or pulls through this in a peaceful, free, fair and credible manner?
I think it's enormously important for the world that Kenya does this. I mean, clearly it's important for Kenyans first and foremost, but in terms of how the world looks at this country, this is a beacon for democracy in East Africa. This is an example in a region where there isn't much in terms of strong democracy. This is an example to the region and indeed to the whole continent of how it can be done, how you can have genuine political competition with a free media and a free civil society. And I think it's no accident that most international companies who want to base themselves in East Africa are here in Nairobi rather than in other parts of the region, in other countries, because this whole framework of democratic competition and liberty and openness, that's part of what attracts the world to this country. So that's enormously important. You mentioned stability, and I'm sometimes accused that the only interest of the international community is in stability. And clearly peace is important. I'm not going to argue against peace, and I don't think anybody would. But this election and the peacefulness and the credibility of this election are important for everything in this country, for the development, for the attraction of international investment that goes forward, for the fight against terrorism, for all sorts of things that we care about and that Kenyans care about.
Just listening to Wafula Chebukati's speech yesterday, clearly painting a picture of a man under siege. I mean, you saw a referee, in all means, which he is within the IEBC, but he clearly also painted a picture of a man seemingly asking for help. He sounds like a man under siege, saying that the future of this country really rests on his hands, and he is not sure whether he will be able to deliver that in 6 days with the situation as it stands. That coming from the IEBC chairperson himself, already painting a picture of a very divided commission. So it seems a bit too late to ask political parties not to arm twist these commissioners at this point, because it seems a little too late. Is it then time to have a conversation of postponing this election? Is this an option that you see from where you sit?
I think that would be something he may want to think about, but it's got to be within the Constitution and it's got to be within the law for me. Otherwise, whatever the courts decide, whatever Mr. Chebukati decides, I think whatever the parties can be brought to agree, I have no opposition to that. It's not my decision. But for me, that working within the Constitution, working within the law would seem to be important. The other thing I would say is that at some point this electoral process has to come to an end. And I think most Kenyans that I talk to say, this is important, but the country has felt in the grip of this election process for a long time now, and at some point, I think soon, there needs to be an election and people need to get back
to move on
with their lives.
All right, which takes me back to my previous question. What then is the significance of international envoys if they cannot come in and really diffuse the situation, perhaps beginning with where your mandate begins and where your mandate stops?
Well, I will work as hard as I can with whoever wants to talk to me to diffuse the current situation, and I will issue calls on behalf of the UK and with my international friends for people to do the right thing. And I think I've said a bit about what I think that looks like at this point. On the international observers, I think there was some confusion, frankly, after the last election in August about what international observers are for. We have international observers in every election. We have them in the UK. People come over and observe our elections, and they make recommendations and they say what went well and what didn't go well. But they don't call the election. They don't decide who won and who didn't win. The Electoral Commission decides that, whether that's in the UK or here in Kenya. And we have to respect its right to do that, as we did back in August. So we're here to help, and we're here to recommend how the process can be made stronger in terms of the electoral observation. But the call needs to be made by Kenyans, and that's another reason why strengthening the IEBC, holding off from attacking the IEBC at that point is vital, because there is no alternative IEBC. The Constitution doesn't say if you don't like the IEBC, then the election can be run by somebody else. It says this is how it happens, and people need to invest in that.
Speaking of recommendations, what then does the UK have to say to Kenya in light of the developments in the political scene as we speak?
So what I would say is people have many choices. They can choose who they vote for, or they can choose not to vote. They can choose to participate in the election, or they can choose not to. But what I would say is choose Kenya. Choose the common good that people have built in this country over 55 years of independence, 55 years of independence. Choose what the heroes stood for that we celebrate tomorrow, which means express those choices peacefully. It means to the government also that police must act within the law. If there are abuses, if there are killings, those must be investigated. People must be held to account. It means for protesters that they have a right to protest, but they must do so peacefully. They must respect people's property. They must not attack the electoral staff as they go about their business.
Right.
This is about everyone just a bit of a recall to reason, really, and just saying, let's just take a breath and make sure that this intense political competition, which should be something to celebrate, does not put everything else behind it, that we put the country first.
All right. Pleasure to have you on KTN Newsdesk. Nick Haley, British High Commissioner to Kenya. They're discussing the political unfoldings in the country just 6 days to the election. Let's now shift